I was just helping his mom in the garden, until she told me to forget the flowers, and plant myself there. The first time I stepped into the garden, I wasn't expecting anything beyond a little work and some polite conversation. Helping my friend's mom seemed straightforward enough: trim the hedges, water the flowers, maybe plant a few bulbs, but the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt something shift. She was there, moving among the blooms with a calmness that made the air itself seem warmer. There was a grace in the way she leaned over the flower beds, careful not to disturb the tiny sprouts, and a quiet focus in her eyes that pulled me in immediately. She noticed me right away, of course, but not in a way that demanded attention. There was a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of her lips, as if she already knew I might be fumbling. When she spoke, her voice was steady and warm, carrying the kind of ease that made ordinary words feel personal. "You missed a spot here," she said, gently gesturing to a patch of soil I had carelessly walked past. There was no scolding, just a quiet insistence on noticing the details, on paying attention. I found myself wanting to impress her, not in a showy way, just enough to earn a small nod, a subtle acknowledgement that I mattered in this little corner of her world. As we worked side by side, I became aware of the small, grounding sensations around me. The scent of fresh earth mingled with the delicate fragrance of flowers in bloom, and somewhere beneath it all was the soft trace of her perfume. It was subtle, comforting, not overpowering, and it seemed to follow her like a whisper. I noticed the way her fingers brushed lightly against the soil, a practiced, gentle touch that seemed almost reverent. When she passed me the trowel, our hands met briefly. The contact was fleeting, yet it left a warmth that lingered in my palm far longer than it should have. I couldn't help but observe her, the way the sunlight caught her hair and made it glimmer, the slight tilt of her head when she concentrated, the quiet confidence in her stance even as she crouched among the plants. There was something soothing about watching her move, something magnetic that made me feel simultaneously clumsy and oddly alive. She didn't rush, and neither did I, though I felt a strange, unfamiliar pull to match her pace, to learn not just how to handle the tools, but how to share the space she seemed to inhabit so naturally. By the time we took a short break, sitting on the edge of a stone planter, I realized I had been paying more attention to her than to the flowers. A casual comment she made about preferring certain blooms over others made me smile, and I felt the first real spark of curiosity, a desire to know her beyond these fleeting moments. She caught my gaze and held it, her expression soft, almost amused, as if she could read my thoughts without a word. In that first hour, the garden became more than soil and petals. It became a space of quiet observation, subtle touches, and a shared rhythm that hinted at something deeper. I didn't know it yet, but this simple act of helping her would start unraveling feelings I hadn't expected, feelings that would grow steadily, quietly, and profoundly, much like the garden itself. After that first hour in the garden, the initial awkwardness began to fade, replaced by something lighter, something that felt like possibility. I was still careful with every plant I touched, conscious of soil under my nails and the sunlight warming my back, but her presence made the work feel less like a chore and more like a shared rhythm. She moved among the flowers with a quiet authority, pausing every so often to glance at my progress, a small smirk forming whenever she spotted a mistake. "You missed a spot again," she teased, pointing to a patch of uneven soil I had overlooked. Her tone wasn't harsh, it was playful, carrying the kind of humor that made me smile despite myself. "Maybe you need to plant yourself a little closer, instead of just wandering around." The words were simple, but the glance she gave me, eyes sparkling, corners of her lips lifted, was disarming. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, a mix of amusement and a flicker of something more I didn't quite understand yet. The teasing continued, each comment a subtle invitation to engage, to relax, to be part of her world. I found myself laughing more freely, feeling my shoulders ease, my hands moving with less hesitation. For the first time, the garden didn't feel like someone else's space, it felt shared, alive with the sound of soft footsteps, the rustle of leaves, and our gentle banter. Every so often, our hands brushed while passing tools or adjusting plants, and each fleeting touch left a ripple of warmth that lingered longer than it should have. She began to notice more than just my mistakes. A small compliment slipped out one afternoon, casual but pointed, "You're careful where it matters." Her words, light as they were, held weight, and I felt a quiet pride swell inside me. It wasn't about showing off, it was about being seen, really seen, by someone whose life experience and grace made every acknowledgement feel significant. In the warmth of that day, I also noticed the little things that made her human, approachable, and captivating all at once. The way her hair caught the sunlight when she leaned over a flower bed, the gentle sigh she let out when wiping dirt from her hands, the soft exhale when she laughed at something I said that caught her off guard, all these details wove together, forming a quiet, intimate tapestry I couldn't look away from. By the time we paused for water, I realized I had stopped thinking about the work itself. I was watching her, the tilt of her head as she considered the next task, the gentle curve of her smile, the way her eyes seemed to measure the garden and everything around her with careful attention. I wanted to step closer, to feel the warmth of her presence just a little longer, but there was a hesitation in me, a respect for boundaries I didn't want to cross. Yet even in that hesitation, the magnetic pull was undeniable. That day ended with a lingering glance as I stepped away, her eyes following me for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I felt a mix of exhilaration and uncertainty, an unspoken acknowledgement that this simple garden task had become something more. Something that would slowly, steadily, draw us closer, in ways neither of us could yet name. And deep down, I knew that the playful teasing, the shared laughter, and those fleeting touches were only the beginning of a connection that was about to grow far beyond the soil beneath our feet. As the days passed, the garden work became more than just a task, it became a rhythm, a space where time slowed and small details carried weight. On one particularly warm afternoon, we paused together beneath the shade of an old maple tree, taking a break from the sun and the constant bending over flower beds. The air was still, filled with the mingling scents of fresh soil, blooming roses, and her subtle perfume, the combination grounding me in the moment. She leaned back against the tree, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and I noticed something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. There was a softness, a quiet fatigue behind her usual confident demeanor, as if the garden were her sanctuary and I was intruding in the most welcome way. Without thinking, I asked if she was all right. She hesitated, glancing at me sideways, her lips pressed into a thoughtful line. Then, with a small, almost shy sigh, she admitted that sometimes she felt alone, that tending to the garden was her way of creating life and color around her when the rest of the world felt heavy. Her words caught me off guard. I had expected light conversation, playful banter, maybe some mild teasing, but not this subtle vulnerability, not this glimpse into the quiet corners of her life. I felt a protective instinct rise within me, a desire to reassure her, to be more than just the helper wielding a trowel. So I listened, really listened, letting her words hang in the warm afternoon air, absorbing each pause and breath, each nuance of her tone. As she spoke, her hand brushed against mine accidentally while reaching for a water bottle. The contact was brief, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore, the warmth of her skin, the softness of her fingers, the unspoken comfort of shared space. My pulse quickened subtly, but I kept my voice steady, offering gentle affirmations, a small laugh here and there, a soft word of encouragement that seemed to make her relax further. In that quiet moment, I began noticing the subtleties that made her both approachable and mesmerizing. The way her shoulders curved slightly as she exhaled, the faint tremor of her hands when she was emotionally honest, the small tilt of her head as she searched for the right words. Each gesture, each fleeting glance, seemed layered with meaning, drawing me closer without a single overt declaration. For the first time, the garden wasn't just a place of soil and flowers, it was a space of shared emotion, a place where silence could speak as loudly as words. I realized I was learning more about her in these quiet pauses than in all the playful teasing of the previous days. Her vulnerability, subtle as it was, invited me to step closer, not physically yet, but emotionally, into a space of trust and understanding. By the time we resumed work, a quiet bond had formed. Our conversation grew lighter again, filled with small laughter and gentle teasing, but now it carried an undercurrent of understanding and intimacy. I felt more aware of her presence, her warmth, her careful movements, the slight brush of her hand against mine, and the pull between us seemed to deepen, quiet and irresistible. The garden had become a place not just of flowers, but of human connection, where shared work slowly gave way to shared hearts, and I found myself both exhilarated and cautious at the same time. By the time our fourth day in the garden rolled around, something had shifted. The playful teasing and shared laughter had settled into a quiet rhythm, and the space between us carried a subtle electricity. It wasn't loud or overt, but I felt it in the way her eyes lingered just a fraction longer when she looked at me, in the soft brush of her hands against mine as we passed tools, and in the ease of our silences. That afternoon, as I struggled to align a row of freshly planted marigolds, she approached, her steps light and deliberate. "You're improving," she said, her voice low, almost casual, but there was a hint of surprise in it, and I felt it more deeply than I expected. The words were simple, a small acknowledgement of effort, yet something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't just praise, it felt personal, as though she had been watching more than just my hands at work. Her gaze caught mine, steady and warm, and for the first time I realized she might notice more than my mistakes or my humor, she might actually notice me. A flutter of nervous excitement coursed through me, and I found myself smiling awkwardly, unsure how to respond. I wanted to brush it off with a joke, to keep the moment light, but her presence made the words die on my lips. Instead, I simply nodded, my attention drawn to the gentle curve of her smile and the quiet strength in her stance. The sun caught her hair just so, and I had to look away for a second, aware of the sudden awareness that thrummed like a heartbeat in my chest. As we worked side by side, the subtle tension between us deepened. Every accidental touch, our fingers brushing as we adjusted a plant, the brief contact of our elbows, felt magnified. There was no overt intention, no flirtation in the traditional sense, but the unspoken awareness grew with each passing moment. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, mingling with the soil and flowers, an intoxicating reminder of her presence. I also noticed the way her eyes softened when she laughed at something I said, the gentle tilt of her head when she considered her next instruction. She, too, seemed more aware of me. Occasionally, she would glance my way with a small, almost imperceptible smile, as if testing the boundaries of our connection. One moment, as I reached for a watering can, our hands met deliberately, fingers brushing, lingering just long enough to create a spark of something neither of us named. My pulse quickened, but the garden's familiar warmth grounded me, keeping my hesitation intact. By the time we paused for a short break, sitting on the edge of the stone planter, I realized how conscious I had become of her presence. Every movement, every word, every small touch felt heightened, charged with subtle emotion. For the first time, I understood that this was no longer just about helping with flowers. It was about the space we had begun to carve between us, a space where unspoken feelings hovered, where quiet glances carried meaning, and where both of us were beginning to notice the pull of something deeper. As I stood to leave, she caught my gaze, her eyes holding mine longer than necessary. There was a warmth there, a recognition, a shared acknowledgement that our connection had shifted. I walked away with a strange mixture of exhilaration and caution, fully aware that the simple act of gardening had quietly transformed into a complex, irresistible dance of awareness, curiosity, and silent attraction. By the fifth day, the rhythm of our time in the garden had become familiar, yet each interaction carried a subtle thrill, a quiet awareness that neither of us could fully ignore. I noticed it in the way she lingered near me as we worked, the small smiles that came when I corrected a mistake, and the casual brushes of her hand that somehow sent a jolt through my chest. The familiarity was comforting, yet it was layered with tension, an unspoken understanding that this connection was moving beyond simple companionship. It happened during a late afternoon when the sun had softened, casting a golden hue over the garden. I was kneeling to adjust a row of tulips, feeling the rough earth beneath my palms, when she appeared beside me. She crouched down in silence for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the carefully planted flowers, and I sensed that quiet pause carried weight. It was a rare moment when words seemed unnecessary, yet my chest ached with the need to say something, to articulate the subtle shift in my feelings that had been growing steadily over the past days. I wasn't expecting to feel this way, I said finally, my voice low, almost tentative. Helping here, being with you, it's become more meaningful than I thought it could. The words felt clumsy, but they carried the truth I could no longer contain. I dared not look up immediately, afraid of how she might respond, but the brief pressure of her hand on my shoulder, light, reassuring, yet intimate, gave me the courage to meet her gaze. Her expression softened, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She tilted her head, considering me carefully, and for a moment, the garden felt suspended in time. The faint breeze rustled the leaves, the scent of soil and flowers mingling with her subtle perfume, creating a sensory cocoon around us. I realized then that the pull I felt was mutual, her calm confidence masking a curiosity and willingness to explore this connection, just as I was learning to do. She leaned slightly closer, her presence warm and grounding. "You're welcome to stay," she said, her voice gentle, teasing just enough to make my heart skip. "Stay a little longer here, not just with the flowers." There was a pause, a soft exhale, as if she were testing the boundaries, measuring my response. I understood the implicit invitation, and it thrilled me, even as it made me hesitate. The age difference, the social expectations, the unspoken risks, they all hovered at the edges of my awareness, yet none of them diminished the magnetic pull between us. I felt a surge of emotion, a mix of exhilaration, caution, and longing, as I nodded, letting her words sink in. The garden had become more than a shared space, it was now a crucible for emotions I had never anticipated. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared laugh had built toward this moment, where honesty and vulnerability could finally surface. As we returned to planting, the quiet intimacy of our connection wrapped around us like a warm blanket. Each touch, though brief, held meaning, each smile, though small, spoke volumes. I realized that the risks were worth it, that this slow, careful, and mutual awareness was worth every heartbeat and every stolen glance. And in that shared silence, filled with soil, sunlight, and subtle glances, I felt the undeniable certainty that our lives had begun to intertwine in ways neither of us could, or would, ignore. By the 6th day, the garden felt less like a place of work and more like a private world for the two of us, a space where every glance, every gesture, every subtle touch carried weight. We had fallen into a rhythm, planting, watering, laughing, and stealing moments of quiet attention when the world outside seemed to pause. That afternoon, the sun was low, painting the flowers and soil in a warm, golden glow, and there was a softness in the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. We had finished a row of newly planted daisies and settled onto the edge of the stone planter, shoulders brushing lightly as we caught our breath. The contact was accidental, or maybe not, but it sent a ripple through me, a quiet thrill that refused to be ignored. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the subtle shift of her body as she leaned just slightly toward me, and the faint scent of her perfume mingled with the earthy fragrance of the garden. It was a moment that felt suspended in time, delicate yet profoundly intimate. Our conversation turned to quieter things that day, fears, small regrets, hopes that had never been voiced aloud. She spoke softly, her voice carrying a vulnerability I had only glimpsed before. I listened, each word deepening my connection to her, making me realize how much I had come to value these moments of closeness. When I offered a small observation, she would look at me, her eyes warm, attentive, and full of a subtle affection that left me both exhilarated and careful, aware of the fragile tension between us. At one point, her hand brushed mine as she adjusted a fallen leaf, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The touch was electric, yet tender, nonverbal and full of meaning. I felt my pulse quicken and a warmth rise in my chest, a quiet acknowledgement that we were moving beyond casual familiarity into something far more potent. Every glance we exchanged held unspoken words, every smile carried an invitation, and every subtle movement of her body seemed to draw me closer without a single word being spoken. I noticed the softness in her expression when she laughed at something small and insignificant I said, the way her shoulder lightly touched mine as she turned to reach for a watering can. Each gesture was layered, intimate, and full of unspoken desire, though neither of us voiced it. The slow burn of our connection had reached a peak, we were close, yet careful, aware, yet restrained. Every shared breath, every subtle glance was charged, building an emotional tension that neither of us wanted to break. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, I realized how profoundly these days had changed me. The garden, the flowers, the soil, all of it had become secondary to the quiet intimacy we shared. I felt a deep affection for her, one that went beyond attraction and entered the realm of care, understanding, and mutual respect. In her presence, I discovered a stillness and warmth I hadn't known I needed, a sense of connection that seemed to exist outside of time itself. By the time we finally stood to leave, there was a lingering closeness in our shared space. A soft brush of her hand against mine as we parted, a gentle glance that held more than words could say, and the quiet understanding that this connection, slow and careful, was only growing stronger. The garden had become more than a place to plant flowers, it had become a place where hearts could grow, slowly, steadily, and profoundly intertwined. By the seventh day, the garden had become more than just a place to tend flowers, it was a quiet sanctuary where time slowed, hearts opened, and unspoken emotions found room to breathe. The subtle tension, the fleeting touches, and the small moments of shared laughter had grown into a gentle rhythm of understanding and connection. Each glance we exchanged now carried the weight of shared experience, and the space between us, once filled with uncertainty, had become a place of trust. That afternoon, the sunlight was soft and warm, filtering through the leaves and painting the flower beds in a golden glow. We were finishing the last row of tulips, our movements in sync without conscious thought, each small gesture a reflection of the closeness that had quietly developed over the week. As I handed her the final trowel, our fingers met in a deliberate brush, and a small, knowing smile passed between us. It was subtle, yet profound, an acknowledgement of everything we had shared in silence, in laughter, and in fleeting touches. We paused for a moment on the edge of the stone planter, sitting side by side, shoulders nearly touching. The warmth of her presence was comforting, grounding, and I realized that the garden had become a place where my heart felt safe to open. We spoke softly, sharing thoughts about the simple joys of tending to life, the satisfaction of watching something grow under careful attention. Each word carried an intimacy that had not been present at the start, and I felt the pull of mutual understanding that went far beyond friendship. Her hand rested lightly near mine on the planter, a weightless touch that communicated more than any words could. I noticed the softness in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips as she smiled at something I said, and the subtle incline of her body toward me, suggesting closeness without breaking boundaries. In that moment, I understood that our connection was no longer tentative. It had matured, grown steady and real, like the garden itself, a slow, careful cultivation of something beautiful and enduring. When it was time to leave, she gave a soft laugh, brushing her hand against mine as we stood. "You know you're welcome anytime," she said, her tone light but meaningful. There was a warmth in her gaze that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I nodded, words failing me for a moment, and realized that this invitation was more than casual, it was a gesture of trust, of shared affection, and of quiet anticipation for what lay ahead. As I walked away, I glanced back, and she was still there, her eyes following me for a heartbeat longer than necessary. There was a gentle lift in her expression, a quiet satisfaction and unspoken promise that the connection we had built would continue to grow. The garden, with its blooms and soil, had become a symbol of that bond, a living testament to the slow, patient cultivation of trust, care, and affection. That evening, the memory of her touch, her laugh, and the soft, lingering glances stayed with me. I understood now that this slow-burn connection, born from playful teasing, shared effort, and quiet vulnerability, had grown into something lasting. It was a reminder that love, respect, and intimacy often arrive gently, nurtured over time, and that sometimes the most profound connections are found not in grand gestures, but in the simple act of sharing space, attention, and heart. In the quiet glow of the fading sun, I realized that the garden had given me far more than flowers, it had given me a bond that felt steady, alive, and beautifully human. And for the first time in a long while, I felt fully, warmly at home. If you felt the slow burn of this connection, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss a story that touches the heart. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear which moment spoke to you the most.